Such powerful images there in the slideshow and amazing words. If you didn't get a chance to see those, we'll be playing those again during other breaks. We're deeply appreciative of the artists who offered their work and the fine curation of that. We're very appreciative. I'm Kendall Phillips, co-director of the Lender Center, and it's my honor to welcome you back to this year's Lender Conversation and to add my gratitude to Dr. Monique Morris for her thoughtful and provocative opening remarks. It is now my privilege to introduce one of the most important members of the Lender Center team and undoubtedly one of the hardest working, Evan Starling Davis. Evan holds an undergraduate degree from Purchase College and an MA in Museum Studies from Syracuse University's School of Design. And he is currently a doctoral student in reading and language arts here at Syracuse. He is an incredible artist, scholar, writer who is, as he puts it, an Afro-surrealist working in realms of technology, narrative storytelling, and curated spaces. I can tell you, as a person who works closely with him, he is tireless. He works as a teaching artist and playwright at Syracuse Stage, a mentor for Writing Our Lives, a member of the advisory board for the Community Folk Arts Center, a public humanities fellow, and as a crucial member of our team as the graduate assistant working for the Lender Center for Social Justice. Please welcome my friend, the amazing Evan Starling Davis.
Thank you so much for those words, Kendall. So thank you everyone for coming today. It's been a really beautiful day and I'm just trying to be human and process these conversations. So I thank you all for engaging with us, our center, in this work. An activist, scholar, and Afrofuturist whose scholarship and advocacy sits at the intersection of environmental justice, racial equity, and emerging technology, Yusuf Abdul-Qadir is a lead organizer with the Syracuse Police Accountability and Reform Coalition, also known as SPARC, a member of the Black Freedom Project, as well as a member in the 13th Forward campaign to end New York's 13th Amendment exemption to the abolition of slavery. He formerly served as an inaugural senior strategist for racial justice at the New York Civil Liberties Union, also known as the ACLU of New York, advancing and integrating the intersectional racist justice lens across departments within the NYCLU, while managing a docket that included environmental climate justice, indigenous rights, marijuana justice, and reparations among the racial justice issues area. He was also co-chair of the Racial Justice Working Group, a core member of the Privacy and Technology Working Group, and a member of the DEI Committee. Currently, he works at Facebook as a product and policy manager. His work around policing here in Syracuse involved the advocacy and litigation to end juvenile solitary confinement in the county's Justice Center, passing and defending bail reform, managing coalitions that changed Syracuse's use of force policy by holding officers accountable for misconduct, while also safeguarding the Syracuse Citizens Review Board, securing privacy protections for surveillance technologies, and advancing the passage of the Syracuse Right to Know Act, among a host of other strides towards police reform and accountability. To say the least, Yusuf is super dope and a very committed activist to our communities. And we're honored to have him here to start off this conversation and moderation with our invited panelists. We couldn't be in better hands with Yusuf. And I can say from firsthand experience that what he brings to this whole conversation is an unrelentless spirit to this work. He's deeply committed to the advocacy he's done in partnership with a lot of grassroots organizations and community members here in Syracuse and beyond, and has been critical to the theme of progress in the city. So I would like to introduce our moderator for the evening, or for the afternoon, sorry everyone, Yusuf Abdul-Qadir.
Thank you, Evan, for that really nice introduction. And I'm honored and humbled to be here at this really important conversation. I was fortunate to have been at the inaugural panel of the Lender Center, and it's an amazing group that's doing really important work. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this is a particularly hard week, as often, unfortunately, many weeks are. So I want to uplift both what Dr. Haddix mentioned earlier. if you are experiencing any trauma from what's happening and you think it's best for you to walk away, please do so. We don't want to re-traumatize you. And these are very difficult, important conversations. But it's really important that we protect ourselves. And so do what you think is best for you. And if that means stepping aside, please do so. But if you are able to stay with us, we have a really, really important and dynamic panel here today who are going to be talking about some really important issues that are centric towards how do we actually get us to a better place, and how do we begin to actually do the work to dismantle these systems. The three panelists here this afternoon, I'm going to start with introducing them, and the format of our conversation is I'll give an introduction of who they are, their bios. Each of the panelists will have 5 minutes opening remarks, and there are 3 of them. And then we'll engage in a moderated conversation between myself and the panelists. Afterwards, we'll open it to folks for Q&A because we really do want to make sure that we are engaging with the collective and not just allowing you to engage in an observation of a conversation with us, but also to be a part of the conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first panelist, the second, and the third. Our first panelist is Brandon Anderson, who is a Black queer abolitionist, organizer, and third-generation military veteran. After losing his partner to police violence during a routine traffic stop, Anderson founded Oakland-based startup Raheem, the independent service for reporting police violence in the United States, working to end police terror against Black people. The service builds tools for communities to report police and uses the open complaint data to advance policies that shrink the role of police by investing in long-term solutions that respond to conflict with care. Ashley Gantt is a co-founder of the grassroots organization and political movement Free the People Rock in the city of Rochester, New York. Born out of Rochester Black Lives Matter, Stop Killing Us protests in 2020, the movement focuses on investing in the Rochester community by defunding the police and abolishing models of the prison industrial complex. And last and certainly not least, Talina Jones is an advocate for families who have children with disabilities. She is the chair of the New York State Early Intervention Coordinating Council, a trainer for the Early Intervention Partners Training Project, and serves on the board of the Central New York chapter of the New York Civil Liberties Union. Her master's research centered on a Black womanist understanding of disability and how that lens might impact the creation of future advocacy programs created for families of color. As I said, each of the panelists will have 5 minutes opening remarks, and we're going to begin with Brandon, then go to Ashley, and then Talina. Brandon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I am also very happy to be here. And this is sort of like a community to have the very difficult conversations about what's going on in our world, in our country, in our lives right now, particularly facing Black people. I wanted to just spend some time with you just for you to get a sense of who I am, so that for the rest of the time we can just dig into some real work and have a healthy conversation. And so I'll start by reintroducing myself. I'm Brandon Anderson. I am born and raised in rural Oklahoma. I was born to a mother and a father, both working class, who spent 36 years together and taught me everything I need to know about love and accountability. And they were my grandparents. I was adopted by my grandparents. I met my mom when I was 15 for the very first time in my life because she struggled with substance abuse. She needed treatment, and instead she was sent to prison. And for the very first time in my life, at 19 years old, I met her father, my grandfather, who in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s organized against police harassment as the first African-American man to own a nightclub in the heart of Oklahoma City. And in 2007, I lost my life partner to police violence during a routine traffic stop. His love was radical, unapologetic, and it completely changed my life. And it has catapulted me into this work here today. The police officer who shot and killed my partner had a long history of being violent, but many people in my community did not report him. That's primarily because it's a joke to report the police to the police. And we knew that even as young kids. But it is also the case that this is the case for most people in the United States. In fact, 95% of people who experience police violence do not report it. And two massive consequences are a result of that. The first is a consequence we talk about, but the second one is one we don't talk about enough. We cannot deliver healing and justice to the victim of police violence if we don't document that and somehow. And there's certainly not a way for us to prosecute the cop, even in that sense. But the second consequence of underreporting police in this country is that policies are currently drafted using data, using the complaint data. That means that if 5% of people in the United States report police violence, the 95% of us who have these extreme conditions, who endure nights, weeks, months, and years of violence at the hands of police, our trauma is neither centered, thought about, or responded to in policies. And so the second consequence of underreporting in the United States, underreporting police violence, is it's difficult to draft policies that are responsive and take care of the people who experience police violence the most. And so in memory of my partner, I founded Rahim, which is the first and only national organization and independent service for reporting police in the United States. And I'll just finish by saying we're known for two things. The first thing we're known for is we run a website that makes it easy for people to report police and get connected to resources for justice and healing. That means that in resources for justice and healing, for instance, we connect you to a free lawyer, we help you file a formal complaint, and then we unite you with a local advocacy organization. Our goal is to move you from being a victim of police violence to an advocate for police abolition. And the second thing we're known for, particularly working to fix that second monumental consequence, we now know in more than 220 cities how police behave. We've been collecting data now for, we're in our fourth year, and that has produced a massive data set on how police perform. And organizations in our network are leveraging that data to advance policies and narrative building strategies that shrink the role of police by investing in long-term solutions that respond to conflict with care. And so I'm going to end there. I'm happy and certainly open and really interested in this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Brandon. Ashley.
Thank you, Yusuf. So first, I'd like to start off just by saying thank you for inviting me to this conversation today. I'm excited about what we can unpack together and ultimately build together. I guess I'll start off, like Brandon did, a little bit about myself and the work that I do and how I got involved. So full-time, I work as an organizer for the NYCLU, also known as the ACLU. But here in Rochester, most of the work that I do is really in the grassroots organizing that I co-founded with a group of other young ladies called Free the People Rock. We really have a laser focus on defunding the police and ultimately abolishing the police. If anyone has watched the news over the last 12 months, then a man was murdered by the name of Daniel Prude here in Rochester, who was going through a mental health crisis. And we've really spent the summer raising and bringing awareness to what happened and also demanding justice. And since then, our city has kind of been on fire, not literally, but every week something has happened with police and the violence against Black and brown bodies. Not even an hour ago here, the police shot a man, and the city is a little bit in an uproar. It just happened. So we've been, every day we're combating different types of police violence. And I'm just, while we are exhausted, not just by what is happening around the country, but specifically the things that are happening here, Black and brown folks literally feel like we are in a war with the police. Every single week something is happening. So yeah, I'm excited to see what we can build together. I'm excited to really open up in this conversation. And yeah, thanks for inviting me. I don't have much to say. A lot is, about myself right now. That is weighing very heavily on my mind. My phone is dinging every 2 minutes, but I'm excited to see what we're going to talk about here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. And I hope that you're okay. And I know the folks in Rochester, and they're really important people. And so do what you need to do, and we'll be here to support you with that. And Talina, you were last and certainly not least in this conversation.
Thank you so much. So I am not employed anywhere right now. I am one of the people who are unemployed in this day and age of COVID, but I am the mother of a going to be 17, as he shared. You probably seen him walking to the bathroom. And if you hear anybody singing New Edition and sounding like they are in the movie Finding Nemo, that will be him singing like Dory when she was singing to the whales. That will be my son, Tajay. I'm a mother of a child with Down syndrome. And I come to this work specifically from a framework of early childhood. So as Yusuf mentioned in my bio, I do a training for the Early Intervention Partners Training Project, where I do a leadership training with families who have children in their birth to 3 years. Why is that important? That's important because it was so incumbent upon my therapist to know that when they were working with me, that I wasn't just asking for speech therapy for the sake of speech therapy, but that I was already thinking about his life as a Black man going through this world, right? I needed him to speak. At that time, I had an ableist understanding of speech, right? I know that I have come along a long way since then because he definitely communicates. But what I realize is everybody is not where I am. And so all I could think about is somebody asking him for his identification or asking him to stop. Everybody was like, hands up, don't shoot. And I kept saying, my son can't say that. He can't do that. And he might not put his hands up. He actually might be physical with you if you do decide to put your hands on him, because he is actually scared and really nervous, and that might be a response. And so all I could see in this moment as it relates to police bodies is death. And I think that's part of the ultimate conversation, is that when we see systems of policing as we understand it right now, we see death. We don't see justice, right? Like, so if somebody was to harm him, where would I go? Would I try to seek justice myself, or would I call the police? I don't know. It's a question. There was a young boy one day when I was here in Syracuse, which is where I live now, but I'm from East New York, Brooklyn. Like, at the end of the day, it's like, I saw him outside and it was like, do I want to call the police right now because he's outside? But I don't want them to bust in his family's house and do something harmful to the rest of his family. But I also want him to be safe. Like, these kinds of questions are at the gate of why we get into this work. And so I have been an organizer for years. My community connectors work under the Hope Project that I recently ended my term with has been around just asking the community questions about their lives. And all of the stories you hear are just antithetical to what we think policing should be in terms of what people experience. And so it continues to make me want to be a part of any work that is abolitionist, anything that can change systems, anything that can change projects, anything that moves us towards justice. I'm a Black feminist. I believe in the liberation of all people. As Angela Davis said, all power to all people. But those who are already in power certainly have utilized, and I'll say this to the white people who are on here, even in Jim Crow, even in the Jim Crow era, there were white people who were in power who used poor white bodies to do their bidding, and to harm and terrorize Black and brown bodies. So it's important for us to think about what that continuously looks like. So what comes from me at night comes for you in the morning. And it makes sense that we think about disability, when we think about oppressed peoples, that we think about these things and really formulate policy after that, because it essentially leads to your own liberation. And that's what I'm committed to. That's the work that I'm always going to be doing, regardless of who I work for. So that's it. Thanks, Yusuf.
Thank you, Talina. It is weighty to have this conversation, and I think it's important to be honest about that and to own it. But I'm hopeful that we can really, really, really get at the crux of these issues. And it's important, and I think I was remiss in not introducing a little bit about the framing of our conversation, because it's important for us to be clear that we're having a robust, radical conversation. And it's only radical because we've gone so far askew from what should be acceptably normal. So I want to say it in that context, that be prepared for this conversation to be pushing you, because we're going to push you. And we're going to continue to push you because it's essential. We are sending this conversation with a fundamental understanding of policing as an institution, not in a discourse about individual actors, not about bad apples. If you feel that's the conversation you came for, I hope that you stay, but if you don't, none of us will be offended. That is not the conversation we're having. We are having a conversation about policing as an institution that is centered and rooted in the preservation of white supremacy, and, to be explicit, white heteronormative male dominant Christian supremacy, ableist supremacy. That's this conversation. And there may be other conversations that you can partake in, but this is the conversation you will get today. And in that context, I'm going to directly begin with Ashley first this time, particularly because of what you just said, Ashley. An hour ago, a Rochester Police Department officer shot a person. Unfortunately, we have to continuously assume that that person is Black and or a person of color. And so I have to ask you first, and then I'll open it up to the others. How do we make sense of police officers repeatedly killing Black community members by accident, while at the same time seeing white men being apprehended for mass shootings and other acts of mass terror, and then having it excused as a bad day? Dylan Roof shot up a church and he was taken to Burger King. Daniel Prue was experiencing a mental health crisis and was not just humiliated, demeaned, dehumanized, but was killed. Why are white bodies able to walk away and go through the process, and Black bodies are not. Ashley, I'll begin with you first.
So Yusuf, I think the first part of how do we make sense of this? And for me, there is no making sense of it, right? It just, we have to call it what it is: racism, white supremacy, implicit bias, and all of that. There is, for me, there isn't a time where I'm like, okay, let's figure this out. Let's try to make sense. My direct reaction is like, how do I support my community? How do we support these families? How do we change policies and change these systems? And for me, I always say this, we're writing policy right now called Daniel's Law, where police officers would not be able to answer mental health calls at all. It would be mental health professionals. But for me, I say this all the time. I've said it at every protest. I don't necessarily think that I'm gonna uproot white supremacy in my lifetime, right? My goal is to loosen the chains so that when the generation comes behind me, it's a bit easier. Unfortunately, I feel like the world is watching Rochester. I feel like we're always in national news. And every week, still, with the eye of the globe on us, the police are acting like fucking savages. So, you know, it's not like, let's make sense of this. It's how do we support the folks in our community? How do we support these families? How do we change this system when we say defund the police, which is the road to abolishment? And that's, to hear the word defund and to hear the word abolish is very difficult for some people, and it's very scary. But for us, having police officers, 90% of them, which don't live in our communities, coming in our communities every single day, and literally, this is not something that we're just exaggerating on, literally terrorizing us, literally terrorizing our children. This is not something that we have to figure out. We know exactly what it is. And I think it's more than time for us to continually call it for what it is and continually pull our elected officials and the police union and all these systems that work together to keep the oppressed, calling them to the carpet and doing whatever we have to do to make sure that we are changing these policies. And when I say whatever we have to do, I mean protesting, I mean writing op-eds, I mean taking these seats and running for office, whatever we have to do to make sure that when my brother walks out of the house or my boyfriend walks out of the house, I don't have to continually live in a state of being terrorized and fearful.
Thank you, Ashley. We're gonna talk about defund and abolition because I think it's important for us to upend the narrative that is happening around that. And I'm happy to have these three folks here with me to engage in that conversation. But Talina, to this question, I'm gonna ask the same question. I'm gonna flavor it a little differently with you. Because oftentimes there's a discourse about, well, if he just complied, right? If they were just compliant, we wouldn't have this problem. Can you explain why that's ableist and what that means for your son with a disability? I mean, you talked about it a bit, but can you, if you would, in answering that question, take it in two frames? The first with respect to not only why that is ableist, but why it puts the onus on him to be responsible for the preservation of his life and not the paid professional. And anything else you want to add to that would be certainly warranted and appreciated.
So I think your answer in and of itself, like the question in and of itself is the answer, right? And that it puts the onus on him, like at the end of the day. And so this notion of compliance is always going to be ableist, because the truth is that there could be a number of reasons why someone doesn't comply. If I'm having a mental health crisis, I might not comply. We're talking about Freddie Gray. We're talking about Tamir Rice. We're talking about Sandra Bland. We're talking about, and all three of the people I just named, one had an intellectual disability, the other two had mental health disabilities, and we don't name those, even while we name their names, we don't name those other pieces of their experience and identity. And I think we just heard Dr. Morris talk about intersectionality, And it's critical to think about, like, so what does it mean to be in these bodies, have those experiences, and then ask me to just comply? What is it to mean to just want order, right? Versus what do you actually need? So what do you want? Do you want my license and registration? Okay. If I didn't give that to you right now, please tell me why do I end up dead? Like that's just a long, right? We could say the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice and it's long. Get that part, okay? But when it comes to us, the road to being dead and confrontations with the police is real short. And so when we talk about being ableist, it's this notion that, have you ever thought that I didn't hear you? How do you handcuff me and I use sign language? What do I got to now talk to you? Or talk to anybody else who's going to defend me? Have you ever thought about my vision? Or my ability to interpret what you're saying to me, or my ability to communicate back to you, or literally my physical body, you telling me to get out the car, and I might be able to drive, but I might also have cerebral palsy and I can't actually get out the car. Like I need assistance. So these kinds of things, these kinds of questions, these kinds of assumptions already put people behind in that moment. But again, why do folks end up dead at the end of this confrontation? That's the problem. Like, if you, as a system that's already in place, and again, really, Dr. Morris, I loved her as a keynote speaker, but it's one of those things where when we think about the carceral system, because I can no longer call it the criminal justice system because there's no justice in it. So, but the carceral system as we understand it does not allow much space in the same way. And Yusuf, you know, we've done a lot of work here in Syracuse around the code of conduct, right? Where Dr. Morris talked about young Black girls. So you would talk about my t-shirt, but you won't talk about rape culture. But you want to talk about my tank top, right? Like literally just bodies, right? But the carceral system as we understand it does not allow for anybody whose bodies act differently, who might be afraid of you because you've caused systemic terror over their lifetime as they understand it, that you wouldn't understand why I don't want to get out the car with you at 9 o'clock at night. No, I'm scared of you. But you want to talk about being scared of me, and then you get to get off because you're scared of me. That is what you use every single time. You're not actually having any accountability. Is that you said you're scared of me, but nobody takes into account the fact that the moment I deal with you, I'm scared of you. Like literally my heart is palpitating when I get pulled over. I never know what's gonna happen, but you get to get off because you get to say you're scared of me. And then Black and brown bodies, and then we talk about disabled bodies, because my son is also plus size. He's a heavy set boy. He moves in with like a certain particular way. So from the gate, he's also going to be seen, even if he doesn't speak, he's also going to be seen just physically from his body being a problem. So in those moments, that's a thing. That's not a systemic issue. That is relationships. That is this long-standing understanding of Black and brown bodies, that is the long history of enslavement, that is still Jim Crow, that is still the ability to have power over certain people's bodies that don't necessarily have power over other people's bodies. And so that is where the problem is, and that's kind of where the situation lies. And so hopefully, I don't know if that's a systemic change, but I definitely know it's why I would defund the police and think about community policing, because if my son is in a community and other people see something happening to him, they could stop that. You know what I'm saying? Versus having to call the police, because honestly, everybody would probably be in a predicament if we did.
No, I thank you for the clarity with which you just explained and unpacked the question and really brought richness to not just your son's experience, but the varied ways that individuals I pause to use the word intersectionality because it's everyone's using it now and it's popularized and its meaning has shifted to being something different than what Professor Crenshaw intended. And I think it's important for us to really be clear about that. Kind of like woke has a different meaning now, and cancel culture has a different meaning now, which all of those terminologies originated in the Black community and has a specific context, but it has been popularized in ways that have reduced their meaning and their impact and their intent. So I think it's important for me to say that before I use the word. But I do appreciate for you taking an honest intersectional approach to explaining the varied ways that our identities and our varied identities come to play. And I want to give Brandon an opportunity to really talk about and answer this question about what really, if I'm honest with you, how is it that these incidents can keep happening and why we can continue to justify these type of actions. And I know that you've had your own trauma that you've spoken to, and I don't want to force you to revisit that trauma, but if you could, in any way that you feel appropriate, answer that question, I would appreciate it as well.
I am not sure if I can articulate any further what has already been said so beautifully by Ashley and Talina. I think that the only thing I leave open is sometimes people forget. Well, before I even get into that, I want to reiterate just to plus one what everybody has said on this call is that there is really no making sense of that. It is not something that I can make sense of, and I am not going to try, and we should never try to compress our imagination in such small, finite ways to try to make sense of such an otherwise perfectly clear problem. Frankly, I mean, Black people can't comply to police. Black bodies are subjects in constant need of policing. It is the identity, it is the culture, it is the existence of Black people that compliance was birthed, that even the terminology and ideology of compliance was birthed through the subjugation of Black people. And so the two, just because anti-Blackness is present in any institution, but especially in policing, there is no sort of making sense of that. So I just want to reiterate that I think that what's been said is I hope y'all hearing them, because it is exactly the point we need to hear so beautifully and so eloquently put and so straightforwardly put is that there is no making sense of this. And I think that we would be doing ourselves and our families a disservice if we spent any more time on this call trying to make sense of that.
No, I think that's right. And part of the irony of the question is to really just say that it doesn't make sense. And sometimes just saying that it doesn't make sense is essential for people to understand how absurdly ridiculous it is to even have that inquiry. I think it was Toni Morrison who challenged someone about their inquiry. Your inquiry is inherently racist, right? And the inquiry is inherently problematic because it presumes that there's any way that there should be any justifiable reason for these actions to happen. But it's important in this context to raise this inquiry so that your answers can be illuminated, so that people can hear that actually no matter how you slice it, no matter which direction you want to take, no matter which approach you want to go by, it can never, ever make sense. And the
But
only way
that's
that it does,
why,
yep, sorry.
but no, Yusuf, but that's why when Ashley answered the question, I was like, yeah, there's no making sense. I was like, yes, clap, 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 clap your hands. Because I was like, no, it don't make sense. It don't make sense.
Can I
No day of
add
the
to
week.
that?
Please.
You know, it's unfortunate, and I'm not saying from you, Yusuf, I know how you get down, but I mean, just general in society, that the people who are oppressed, specifically brown and Black people, are always being asked to make sense, are always being asked to forgive, are always being asked to be the bigger person. And that in itself is oppressive. That just crossed my mind. And we're talking about that question here, but that's the question all the time. That's the question that the media is doing. That's what the media is doing all the time. Just the way they portray people like Dylan Roof, the way they portray people like, just the guy who was shot here just an hour ago. They don't know him, and just the media outlets, the way they're writing the story already, it's just disgusting.
But then we also talk about organizers and the work that all of you folks are doing, and then they wonder why we're tired. And it's just like, we're tired because you don't get to rest in these conversations. You don't get to rest. Like, you're going to wake up to a text. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to skip a Facebook post. Mm-hmm. Or you're going to have to organize or mobilize. You're going to have to consistently show up. And other people get these other options. But if you choose to step into it, it's like, that's also heavy. But if you choose to stay out, it's also heavy, because it's like, what do you do in these moments? And so it's still a burden, like, on the community who is oppressed, to your point, Ashley. Like, it's still like the burden is still ours, and yet we didn't kill nobody.
Exactly.
God damn it. We didn't do it. The fuck? I'm sorry.
No, I think
did
the
I curse on the SU thing? I'm sorry.
It's all right. We said we're gonna have a different kind of conversation. We will have a different kind of conversation. But I want to move us along, because there was another question I was going to ask, but I honestly think I want to skip that question because I think it's actually really important for us to get to the core of this conversation, because we can spend all evening pontificating, philosophizing, and going through 400 plus years of history. You turn on the TV, you see it in 5 seconds. It's not overly complicated. It's really not difficult. It isn't obtuse or concerned or problematic. It really is quite simple. We just choose to, and not by we, I don't mean me. I mean, predominant culture chooses to ignore what is overtly obvious in front of our own eyes. Mm-hmm. But this summer, people were calling for defunding the police, right? And I had a very viral video that came out this summer that talked to this issue, and not to reiterate it, but just to talk about one aspect of it, the way in Syracuse, 95% of the police don't live in the city. So We are functionally subsidizing the suburbs because the police force takes their money that are taxpayer dollars and go to the suburbs, live in those communities, have all the benefits of the American dream that we are denied. Meanwhile, they criminalize, impoverish, and overly incarcerate our communities. And it wasn't to say that, and now let's have the police move into the city and therefore the solution is done, right? Like, it isn't about police residency, which is what the media wanted to make it. It isn't about diversifying the force, which I guess both of those things are helpful, but that's not really what it was about. It was about demonstrating the way that the ecosystem implicates Black lives, right? The way that we are pulled, resources are literally pulled from every angle. And it's not enough that we're literally funding for you guys to have everything. You then are kind of come and terrorize our communities with what we refer to as a warrior cop mentality, with the language, with the mindset, with the technologies of war, right? That you engage in our communities as if we're occupied forces. So when people say defunding the police, it was talked about as a joke, it's a hashtag, it's a policy position that people are really clear about. But because there's a lot of forceful will to misinterpret what it means, I want to give each of you the opportunity to explain what defunding the police can look like. And how can we speak to the challenges and resistance towards defunding the police when other American systems are constantly defunded? And I want to begin because you're on my screen, Ashley, and then I'll go to Brandon and then Talina afterwards.
For sure. So I think for us this summer, that was like the biggest thing that we've asked for. We've been pushing for it. We will not stop asking for it until it happens. So for example, here in Rochester, the police department gets $149 million a year. We know that they only solve 24% of crime. And I know that I can't do 24% of my job at night and still have a job. My daughter can't get a 24 on her test and pass. My daughter can't do 24% of her work and go to 7th grade. So what we're saying here is like reallocate some of those resources. And while the police is funded, education is defunded here. Activities is defunded here. We had one gym, the YMCA here in downtown Rochester, where everybody went, you know, because we don't have anything else for young folks to do. Everybody was there playing basketball, swimming, et cetera, et cetera. And last week we found out that gym is going to be closed. So it will not be accessible anymore for our young folks to go to. So what we're saying is like defund the police, reallocate some of those resources to things like education, to things like housing. We live in a sanctuary city and we have one of the largest homeless rates like in Western New York. And it's absolutely ridiculous. Our school system is operating, the Rochester City School District is operating as if it was a school in a third world country with no access to resources at all whatsoever. And for us, this is the trickle effect. We talk about mass incarceration, we talk about adding to the carceral system, and we talk about the school to prison pipeline. And all of these issues are so interconnected. We can't talk about one without the other. The biggest terrorist in our community is the RPD, and they get $149 million a year to do it. We know that they don't stop crime. In Rochester, the #1 crime that police are arresting folks for is for petty larceny. Petty larceny, 80% of the rest are people stealing food. Right here in Rochester, we had a man, he was about 60, go to prison for stealing Lunchables. We had another man go to prison, not jail, to prison. Not that people should even be going to jail for this crap, to prison for stealing sardines. And we're saying instead of criminalizing the poor, let's get to the root of poverty. Let's reallocate some of these resources. And we've been saying the same thing over and over the entire summer. We're going to continue saying it. We're asking here that the police be defunded by 50% at least. For me, the road to abolition is to defund, right? But we can't put the cart before the horse. So we need to start with defunding. We can't even imagine how many kids in Rochester, the amount of kids below the poverty line is over 80%. That means kids are going home not knowing if they're going to have gas and electric, not eating dinner, probably not seeing their parents because their parents are working 2 and 3 jobs, still not getting a livable wage, trying to make ends meet. I feel so passionately about this. We talk about our kids don't even have books, like books that's not ripped up, torn apart, gum sticking in between the pages. 90% of our police force do not live in our communities. And that would not solve it, right? Just like Yusuf said, you know, this summer I was on a panel and I was on a panel along with the police and they were saying like, oh, we're trying to diversify. Even if you diversify the department, we're talking about a culture of policing, the culture. And you know, white folks like to say, I don't see color, but if we're talking about not seeing color, the police department is one of those places. I read a statistic that said, before we can even talk about what getting a just, which I don't even like to use that word, or just, or being on the road to reforming the police department, 40% of the police departments across the nation need to be Black and brown. But we know even if we were close to 40% of the police department being Black and brown, it still doesn't get to the root causes of the terrorism and damage that police officers are doing in our communities. So when we say defund, we mean reallocate some resources to things like education, to things like housing. Housing should be a human right. People should not be getting evicted at astronomical rates. And we know that Black men are locked up at alarming rates and Black women and children are locked out at alarming rates. We talk about what the next 7 months are going to look like here in Rochester, and people are going to be evicted faster than we can even freaking think about it. Reallocate some of those resources. I just sat with a lady at one of the community places here who got resources to be able to help people pay their rent. And the hoops of fire, the rings of fire that they was asking this woman to jump through just to be able to pay her rent. It was ridiculous. And then the people had to like raise this money to pay this woman's rent. Reallocate some of those resources to housing, to education, to activities for young people. I can go on and on about this. I don't want to talk too much. I'll give it to somebody else, but reallocate resources. Like, this shouldn't even be a problem. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, somebody asked her, if we defunded the police, what would it look like? And she said it would look like the suburbs. Access to resources. We'll be able to walk on if I walk out my apartment right now, I'm gonna at least see 5 police officers. We want the same chance, the same access to opportunities, the same benefit of the doubt as our white counterparts are getting. That's it.
No, thank you, Ashley. Brandon, you mentioned in your introduction that one of the goals of Raheem is to move people from victims of police violence to an advocate for police abolition. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that and how Raheem is doing that work as well.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to, I wanted to, before going down that road or through some context, I wanted to do a few things. One, I think it's just important to talk about how policing happens today. Second, they want to talk about like, what's the solution? And then like, how do we get there, right? And for me, starting off with this, I remember earlier in the conversation, someone mentioned police terror, and I think it was to you, it was you, Talina, right? Mentioning police terror or something. And for me, when I remember someone asking me the question, well, what do you want us to do? You know, and so I'm often thinking about Talina's point in terms of you know, once again, it is the responsibility of people who are most harmed by this system to also produce its solutions. And I think that is such a profound statement, and it is something that I have for the past several years just been grappling with, because I both see it as a gift and a curse, and it's both what got me into this work, but it sometimes can be overwhelming. And so I really appreciate her pointing that out. I don't think it happens enough. Police terror is the consequence of decades of unrelenting state-sanctioned violence levied, especially against Black people, by militarized police forces, and resulting in high rates of Black death and extreme fear within the Black psyche, collectively and individually. So when we talk about how, so when Talina brings up the point about you don't understand the gravity with which you wear this uniform and what it means to the lives of people that look like me. And I also think it is in that case coupled with, if you couple this police terror with the ongoing fact, that Ashley that Ashley is bringing up, that police officers are very rarely, if ever, held accountable by governments for the senseless killings of Black people. And the presence of police becomes this looming, inescapable threat to Black bodies everywhere. And it is a very simple claim that any use of police is the use of force. Police are trained to negotiate conflict with force. The training that they have is training that teaches them on how to use their body weight in de-escalation tactics, their weapons, grenade launchers, M16s, sometimes semi-automatic weapons. Like they are trained to negotiate conflict with the use of force. Their presence is in and of itself a use of force, psychologically at least. And therefore, governments who are trying to negotiate their conflict societally with the use of police are negotiating that conflict with the use of violence. And we should be clear about that there is no extrapolating from those two. If you use police to negotiate conflict in any way, we are negotiating our conflict with the use of violence. And so that should be our question. Should we be negotiating our conflict with the use of violence? And I think that in answering that question, we should then ask ourselves, who should be drawing up the solutions for this? Who should be making the plans for things like this? Who should we be listening to understand the trauma, and then be pointing to say, these are the people who we think have the solutions? Well, this summer, last summer, there's a global campaign to defund the police, and somebody recently asked me if that was a thing that they thought was reasonable. And I'm often asked this question a lot, and I was reminded of a time when my little sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. I'm taking on a quick story. 2 years ago, and when I found out, I had organized all our friends to be with her in every session. I paid for as much medical bills as I could afford. And then I went to New York, I live in Oakland, to be with her as long as I could, right? And she's cancer-free now, but a few months ago, she called me and she was like, hey, I want to pick a bone with you. I got a bone to pick with you. If y'all don't know what that means from the country, that means I got something to talk to you about. And so we're chatting, and she's like, look, I'm angry with you because you did not drop everything in your life you had going on. You didn't, I didn't quit my job. I didn't break my lease. I didn't put my relationship on hold and move to New York to be with her as long as she needed me to be, until she told me she no longer needed me. And that was a real hard pill for me to swallow. And so I asked a friend for advice, and I'll never forget what they said. They asked me that question again: is that reasonable? And I think about that question as an abolitionist. I'm reminded often, this question: is it reasonable to live in a world with no police? And when I asked my sister how long, why she waited so long for me to for her to tell me that this is what she had needed, is because she said I had lived my entire life as a Black woman that required me to avoid taking up too much space in any room, which meant me asking for what I thought was reasonable and what I thought others might find reasonable. And at first I blamed her for a lot, and now I'm coming around to it, that I am very glad my sister is no longer asking me for what she thinks I find is reasonable, but she is asking me for what she needs to heal. And I think that if you're asking the question about who needs to be making decisions about what is the solution and what we should be doing,
We should be listening to the people who are in closest and in deepest need of healing, okay? And those are these communities. And the other reason is like, there is a better way, right? We're actually, like Talina said, we're not truly meeting the needs of people, right? It's an ineffective strategy of negotiating our conflict with police. It's an ineffective strategy for one major reason is that it conditions us and other institutions to negotiate our conflict with the use of violence. That means that in our intimate personal relationships, we negotiate our conflict with violence. And this can be said for the fact that 40% of all the domestic violence reports involve police, okay? It's because they live their lives negotiating conflict with violence, and they go home and negotiate that conflict in the very way. It makes perfect sense. So we are now negotiating our intimate conflict with violence. We're also negotiating communal conflict with violence. Individuals and institutions, including corporations, negotiate their conflict with violence in the punishment-driven and less restorative practices and policies that institutions like the education system put in place is influenced by a system of policing. The insurance companies require you to call police if you want, if in any way you want to get your, if somebody steal your shit, you got to call the police and you got to make a claim. So there is an entire market of policing and using violence to negotiate our conflict that's been created for the economy of white, rich, wealthy people who are mostly ableist, mostly straight, mostly white, mostly men. And so the last question then is, how the hell do we come up out of this? And not to make this a long drawn out thing, we've been thinking about this for a very long time. So to get to your question, Yusuf, Raheem for the past 4 years has been collecting data. Thousands of people in more than 220 cities in the United States have reported to us the performance and behavior of police. But they have also pointed to us why they call police in the first place, what they would have preferred other than police, and how their conflict could have been resolved otherwise if police were not present, how they wanted that conflict to otherwise be resolved, giving them some uninterrupted space to dream about what a world with no police could look like. And that data has produced, those questions and reports have produced a massive data set that Raheem, starting in the beginning of starting now, but launching in the beginning of next year, will now develop and launch Mutual Aid, which is an alternative dispatching system to 911 that plugs in institutional organizations and others who are non-police, high quality acute crises delivery driven. And so we will be essentially connecting the institutional resources that exist across the country throughout these 220 cities. Because the issue is that there are places where if you are mentally unwell or see a person who's experiencing or you believe to be experiencing being mentally unwell, you can call that number. But you don't know the number, you know 911. And so because that institution, because of policy and police unions and the economy not working out for rich, wealthy white folk who are part of the policing system, those institutions aren't connected to 911. They're outside of it. You got to know the full number. You gotta actually dial it. You also have to be local, right? So there are thousands of these in the United States that don't currently have the infrastructure to be a part of the 911 dispatch system. So Raheem is building an alternative dispatching system to 911. People will use either a mobile app or a phone number they call or text. You will receive a non-police, high-quality response to acute crises, any acute crises that does not require a man to show up at your house with a badge and a gun. Luckily for us, most damn conflict don't require a man to show up at your house with a badge and a gun. And so the idea is this year we're conducting the research to understand what institutions exist throughout the country. We will develop and produce the mobile app and the dispatching system to replace 911. 911 is only 50 years old, people. It's ineffective. It's no longer working. We can change it. And then in 2022, we will launch a pilot here in California in 2 cities. 2023 will go statewide, California statewide, and then in 2024 or 2025, we will launch the nationwide mutual aid, the first alternative dispatching system to 911.
Wow, as a faculty of information policy and as a person who looks at racial justice and technology, I think that's fascinating. Not just because of the way that you talked about all of the histories and interwoven realities that have been born out of it, but also how do we actually manifest solutions that are scalable in a really innovative way. And so I will definitely be catching up with you offline about that. Selfishly, I'm getting the opportunity to get this from you. Talina, I want to give you a chance to answer this question before we move on to the last question.
Well, I think Ashley and Brandon really captured most of what I wanted to say. Because
So indulge me in the last question then, which is what does public safety without police look like?
What does public safety without police look like? And so that's interesting because where I was going with my answer was this notion of, for example, if I am a victim of domestic violence, who do I call, right? Do I call Vera House, which is the local agency here? Are they overwhelmed? This gets back to Ashley's point about reallocated funds. Do we fund them as an organization more broadly, right? So that they can take on the scale. If I'm a transgender woman, when we talk about Say Her Name and Kimberly Crenshaw talking about intersectionality, and when she started the Say Her Name movement, there were so many names that were mentioned, but one of the stories that I remember deeply is how 911 responders, particularly police, left her out there because her genitalia was exposed, and they left her exposed like that outside until the EMT came, because nobody, and part of the reason she died is because nobody wanted to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, because nobody wanted to give a transgender woman mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It's horrific when you think about it, but it is true. And so, but they were called on a mental health call. So when you think about like how those things happen, so who else do you call? And do you always want to go to an institution? When you're committed for 72 hours, there are horrific things that happen to people who go into those places and spaces. And so you might not necessarily want to go into that. So who else is doing holistic versions of like care and concern about the people that we love and care about? If it's a substance abuse issue, who else do we know that is doing things that we know that we could trust the institution with care and concern? And I think that's where in the midst of an emergency, we might call 911, but I don't think we have thought about enough of who are the institutions and how can we reimagine those things. And that's the thing. I tell people all the time, and no offense to anybody on here who's white, but I'm like, I don't want to talk to white people anymore about the things that you're doing. I'm sorry. I don't know. Y'all might not want me to be on the panel tomorrow.
Don't be sorry. No, don't be sorry.
No, I'm fake sorry. But y'all might not want me to be on the panel tomorrow. But I was like, in terms of Black and brown bodies, I was like, we don't often have time to talk about the ways of reimagining and re-envisioning what it is to look at life without things that we're asking for. So if I'm saying defunding the police, then how do I then police? How do I then, not using the word police, let me take that back. How do I then defend the sister who is getting harmed by the brother in my community? Like, what does that look like, right? What needs to happen there, right? Like, those are the kinds of questions that we would need to grapple with, but we never have time to do that because we're dealing with death and use of force and harm in these other kinds of ways that we don't get to deal with. Like Ashley brought up issues of poverty and like food resource and somebody kind of going to jail, or our youth who are getting kicked out of school and going directly to prison, you know, because they did X, Y, and Z, or having a school hearing and then next thing you know, they're in prison, or why they become shooters, or why they become, we don't get to deal with that like at a serious sense and a serious level. And I think those of us who are community organizers, like that's where we are, that's where we're centered. And it's really frustrating to not have that be able to be scaled up. But then that's why I think those of us who are also talking about policy and practice are still sitting here and having these kind of larger conversations, because truth be told, if you're listening to what we're saying, then you can take that into your own spaces. And when you get questioned about certain things, then you can think about these other kinds of questions. And I think that's also important, that it doesn't, you know, they say heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? And so if we're not always at the table, these kinds of conversations are that much more important, because then you can bring it back to the tables you sit at. And you can also ask the question, because in the spirit of allyship, that is effective allyship. Like, I don't have to be there, but God dog it, you could ask the question. You could change the game. You could say you was here and you want to know what else is somebody doing to impact poverty, to impact homelessness, to impact these things. And you don't have to do it with a white supremacist implicit bias explanation, because honestly, white people are experiencing it too, right? Like, what are your thoughts about who is experiencing it and what do they look like when you think about who is poor? Not all of us are poor, and you know, all look Black. Your little white kids is poor too. So at the end of the day, we also talking about your kids too. Little white kids with disabilities is also getting kicked out of school. Like, I'm just saying, like, I always am going to censor Black and brown communities. I definitely want to censor our Black and brown girls. They don't get talked about enough, especially around their mental health, because when you talk about our bodies and how we move through the world, I always tell people I'm a big Black brown girl. And somebody asked me, why you always talking about being big? I said, because my body has been talked about for my entire life at the size that I am. I said, so it's important for me to say So it's critical that we think about who are the marginalized folks. The things we do for the most oppressive people oftentimes leads to changes in systems that will change the lives of everyone if we're actually honest about it. And that's so critical to think about. If you think about how defunding the police, and then you think about where those funds go, to Ashley's point, Brandon, to your point, when you think about who we're talking to about it, like who we're considering in the conversation, like if we think about all of those things together, then it's not just an ask. It's like a real policy practice conversation that's not just strategic, but it really is. And I think Brendan uses a militarized police force. So all of the money you use in order to have a tank come down Salina Street in Syracuse, you mean to tell me that the Syracuse City School District is operating at a deficit, but the police got a tank? For what? Like, for what? Like, that doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. And it's like a basic kind of 101 doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
really, it's a 101 doesn't make sense. So it's one of those things that it's like, we can defund, yes, but we also need like really an opportunity. And I think Yusuf, you've been great about conducting Spark as a think tank and really a place of community organizations to be able to talk about, so what does that look like? What's next, right? What happens afterwards? Like, if we get that, all right, you defund it, so what's next? And I think community members could appreciate that. And like I said, being a part of of my project, which was the community connectors here in Syracuse, listening to people, they got all kinds of answers. And so when you go back and speak to the people talking. That's why I'm a Black feminist. We've been sitting at the seat of our grandmama's tables for a long time and have had the answers to a lot of things for a long time because they already know. So if we really,
that's right, Talina.
If we get back to the people, they'll tell us. They'll tell us.
I think that's right. In fact, just to uplift Spark, because I'm an organizer with them, and this then we'll kind of get everyone to close, is we function in that way, right? Like we actually often, in fact, most of the time, and I'm going to actually indulge people to do this now. I mean, like actually do it as I say it. We tell people when we are in these conversations to close their eyes. And I don't mean rhetorically, I don't mean sarcastic, I mean like actually close your eyes, like right now. And when you think about what public safety means to you, I'm certain you probably would see, as the images are, a sunny day, blue skies. You might see children on a front porch. You might see kids playing basketball. You might see a grandmother knitting. You might see uncle playing dominoes. You might see birds chirping in the sky. You might see a beautiful, what you would otherwise expect to be a beautiful summer day. What you don't think about when you say public safety is someone getting their head bust up by a billy club. What you don't think about when you imagine public safety is someone being thrown against the car and pushed on the floor, right? Like that's not what you intuitively think, except that's all that we're given. And so what we try to do is engage people in reimagining what safety can mean to them, because it's so essential, because to your point, Talina, they actually do have the right answers to the questions. And apparently everyone had the answers because there were very few questions in the question and answer. So I do want to give you all a few moments to round up like closing remarks, because this is such an essential conversation, and we could have had more time, and perhaps we will have more time. I just started a podcast, so maybe I'll invite the three of y'all to come on the podcast and talk about this issue for an extended version. But I do think it's important for people to get a sense of, as we close out this conversation, what are the gems that you want to leave people with? Because there was a lot to take here. There's a lot of trauma that we discussed. There's a lot of innovative and important solutions. There's a lot of centering Black women and centering people with disabilities. There's a lot of owning and claiming our futures for ourselves that was in this conversation. But it's really important to leave people with some closing thoughts and directions for where they can go, and perhaps resources. So I'm going to allow each of you rapid fire a chance to close. But I want you to be able to do that in your own way, in a way that honors your own self. So whatever you feel is the best way to end that, I open up the floor. And I'll start with you, Talina, and then we'll go to Ashley, and then we'll end with Brandon.
I just want to say that at the end of the day, and thank you for this conversation and the opportunity to do so. I just want to say that when we talk about responses and what we think are the strategies that we think about it as a collective, I'm always going to advocate for collective work. I'm always going to advocate for the fact that I use intersectionality in the spirit of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, but I always want us to include students with disabilities, people with disabilities, because we don't talk about them enough, even if we're talking about Black and Brown communities, and that when we are organizing, that we're always organizing for the most oppressed peoples. And I think when we get those solutions there, when we think about it from that lens, then we will move on further. But that at the crux of this conversation, police bodies is something that we must continually think about, and that we really do have the opportunity to change and shift the culture and support all of the community organizers who are already out there doing the work to move this ahead and move this forward in terms of defunding the police, especially our militarized police force. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Talina. And for those who had their eyes closed, you can also open your eyes back up again. Sorry for not directing you to do that. Ashley.
So one, just thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation today. And I never think that we are in these spaces, and I don't mean just us as panelists, but even the folks that's listening, just because, right? I believe that we're here for a purpose. And once we hear these conversations, we're responsible to be actionable, to do something. So I don't want to just keep talking about what police officers are doing to Black and Brown bodies. I want us to move, right? So number one, we have what we're calling Daniel's Law on the floor right now. In the Senate, Summer Brook is carrying it, and in the Senate, Harry Bronson is carrying it. And what it would do is allow mental health professionals to be the ones answering mental health calls. And if a police officer, if the mental health professional deemed that it was necessary for police officers to be on the scene, to be on the ground, they would be there, but the mental health professional would be the one taking the lead. And we really need folks to get to talk to the legislators. We really need folks to get involved with advocacy. I'm going to leave my email in the chat if anyone wants to email me and you want to see like legislation or the one pager, or to really dig in more. We really need that to pass this session. The next thing is the people closest to the problems are the people with the solutions. That is going to always be the answer. And I think like what we have to do is like when we talk about what police, community policing looks like, or what we think an alternative looks like, we have to ask the people that are most directly impacted by police violence. We cannot ask the powers that be. The governor gave a commission to all the municipalities in New York to really talk about and create what police reform looks like. I know here in Rochester, the people who were at that table were the powers that be: police chiefs, police commissioner, the commissioner of the president of the police union. And I say that that's bullshit, right? When we ask the powers that be, we get the same thing that we've always gotten. We went from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration. It's all slavery. It's all slavery. And if we're not careful, we're going to repeat the same thing. When we talk about community policing, since the death of Daniel Pruitt here, people have been calling us instead of calling the police. Yesterday, a woman called us because she got stabbed by her brother who was going through a mental health crisis, and the police showed up, and we asked the police to leave, and we handled the situation. And that might sound scary. At the end of the day, guess what? Her and her brother sat down, had a conversation. We was able to put him in a hotel because we didn't want to make him go to the hospital, set him up with a lawyer, set him up with food, and figure out how we can get him into some transitional homes. The community has the answer. Period. That's what it is, and those are the conversations that we have to have. I don't live next door to police officers. Police officers are not my brothers, my cousins, my sisters, my brothers, but some of y'all on this call do, and start having those very difficult conversations. Sorry, I was trying to talk fast so we can get it done, but that's my takeaway.
No, that's excellent, Ashley. I just want to uplift something about Daniel's Law because it's really important. When Ashley's talking about mental health, we have to understand that the mental health system has also been deeply embedded in funneling Black families into the carceral state. So she's specifically talking about trauma-informed, culturally competent, communal types of approaches that are very different than the current child regulation system. So I just want to be clear that that's not what she's talking about. They're really thought this through and engaged a wide body of community healers and others to think about this critically. So because I knew about this work, I know to say that, but just wanted to uplift that for you, Ashley.
Thank you, Yusuf.
Absolutely. And Brandon,
No,
last
I
and
just,
certainly not
Daniel,
least.
I was going to say, Ashley,
Yes.
honestly, you know, anything you could do to, and I know you're going to put the link in the thing, but I just think that anything you could do to put it on Facebook or to get it in, especially early childhood communities, really is important, because folks are thinking about that from a young children perspective, and early childhood folks are actually, you know, we're savages. We call the people in a minute. So
we will definitely create space for you and all others here to organize together. But we are almost at time, so just want to let Brandon have the last word here. Brandon.
Thank y'all. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna be super fast. If you're an organization that wants to help build an ecosystem that makes it friendlier for people to report police and get resources for justice and healing, Raheem has built a chatbot widget that you can put on your website. It turns any ordinary website into a website where you can report and track the police, and then get connected within 24 hours to resources for justice and healing anywhere in the country. The second thing I wanted to put up is, and the widget is free. It takes 3 or 4 minutes to install, and you don't need any technical experience. So that is the link I just put in the chat. The second link I wanted to put in the chat was, we're hiring the communications director, a data and policy director, as well as an organizing director, and soon to be a staff attorney later this year. All those jobs are up. You can find them at raheem.org/jobs. And then the last thing I'm just going to put up there is just my email. If you're interested in connecting with me. Thank y'all. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Before I hand it over to Evan, I want to say, like, I wanted these 3 people to be here on this panel. So I'm personally super happy that folks got to hear all of your brilliance. I know Talina and Ashley well because we're friends and I've worked with them, and I'm always honored to be in their presence. And Brandon, I've followed you in your work, and I think what you're doing is so important and essential, and happy to be in collaboration with you. And so I just want to thank the 3 of you for giving us your brilliance, sharing your trauma and helping us to have this really deeply engaged conversation. And I want to thank the Lender Center for offering us the space and the ability to create such a conversation. And with that, I will hand it over to Evan.
Thank y'all so much. I can't see myself right now, so I hope everyone can see me. Thank you, Yusuf. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Talina. Thank you, Ashley. The work that you guys do, you all do in these communities, in our community, for just people who look like us and have to experience this world like us. I deeply, deeply, deeply appreciate that. So if you are listening to this call, please get involved. If you don't know where to start, please reach out to the Lender Center and we can direct you to the resources so you can get involved. This is people's real life experience, and we all have a part to be accountable for that. With that said, we're gonna go on break. We'll be returning at 4:15 for our second panel, Policing Bodies in Schools. So taking from Dr. Morris this morning, go drink some water, go take a break, go stand up and get some fresh air outside, and join us back in about 14 minutes.